My name is Melody McAllister, and I'm the Spaces Community Facilitator. And today, Rochelle will be showing us how she infuses SEL into her classroom lessons using Spaces. I think I just said that. We are so excited to have her lead us today, as she is an educator who never stops learning and growing, and also wears the hats as a lawyer, author, speaker. She is renowned and awarded by institutions like ISTE and just recently her own school district. Rochelle is also my friend, and we work together weekly, and I know how much time and sweat she puts into her blogs, podcasts, and community building. You can follow her on Twitter at rdanae915 and at thelr. Rochelle, thank you so much for being here today. It is truly an honor and a privilege. I will give you the reins, and I'm looking forward to learning more about Spaces with you.
You are way too kind for all of those kind words. So thank you for such an awesome introduction and for holding up the book, and to everybody that's joining in now or joining in later. And I also do love the lights behind you too, Mel. I will say that. So I am excited to share today some ideas that I've used, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully you can actually see it, which I think you can. But like Mel said, 5 ways, but I have a feeling that there's going to be more than 5 ways, because just every day when my students come in, they're asking, are we using Spaces today? Or what are we doing today? Can we do Spaces? And it's been so interesting for me to do that and to see like their response to it. So you already gave me an introduction, so I don't need to spend any time on anything about myself other than to say, I love learning. I love interacting with the students. And if you have ideas to share, questions, anything, connect with me at any time. I'm very consistent across everything with, like Mel said, the rdanae915, my blog, and my email. I'd be happy to, if I don't know the answer, connect you with somebody that actually knows the answer. So looking forward to sharing this with you today. And it's going to be interactive, so be ready for that. So the first way, I'm going to tell you actually how I started with Spaces. It was about almost a year ago when we were in hybrid, and I was using it in my 8th grade STEAM course. And the students, most of them, I think I had like 16 to 18 students in each of the 2 groups. Most of them were staying virtual for the rest of the year. And a big part of what we do in that class, we look at augmented virtual reality, we look at artificial intelligence, we do some Genius Hour activities. And that was the first time that I didn't have them together, obviously all in the same space. And so giving them the opportunity with project-based learning to kind of go on their own, explore what they were interested in with more independence was a little more difficult for me, because I obviously couldn't see what they were doing. Now, even though we were using Teams to meet, I could ask them to show me on the screen or hold it up to the screen or send me an email or a message or something through Teams, but it wasn't quite the same. And then the kids that were in the classroom, I had a lot of time to spend with those like 5 or 6 students that were actually coming in. So I wondered, I'm like, there has to be a better way to do this, where if the students work on something over the weekend, in the evening, or they don't really want to share out in class because of that comfort speaking in front of others to help them to build their confidence, what can I use? So found out about Spaces, and like all things, I just decided to dive right in. And so when I first used it, it was with those 8th graders who at first were kind of like, we use a lot of technology in that course because it's emerging technology, but also basic things like digital citizenship skills and like, how do you write an email? How do you interact with people online? So there's a lot of possibilities, but they're used to like, hey, we're going to try this, or we're going to create with this thing. So when I told them that we were going to use Spaces and to create an account, at first they were like, oh, is this going to be difficult to use? You know, because they were like, in all of our schools, you're probably seeing a lot of different tools being used because everybody was trying to find like how to keep learning going. And I said, well, I don't know, because I'm learning this with you. I'm just starting this with you. So I had them create the account and told them, this is what I think we're going to do with this, but we'll see how it goes. And I really did not, like sometimes I do this, I didn't give them a lot of directions as to what I expected or what I wanted, because I was also learning and I was curious to find out how they would use that space. So I posted just kind of a prompt that said, all right, we're working on project-based learning. You have an independent project on artificial intelligence. Here's your timeline. And I would like to know, as you work along the way, like, what are you learning? What are the questions you have? What are some challenges? I mean, anything that you want to share with me. And you have these options to do that. So I was really excited to like get started with it and see what they did. And so first, a couple of the students were, in class, they're like, well, we don't have to use Spaces because we're here. And I said, but what if we shift to fully virtual? Then you still have to know how to use this. And maybe you want to interact with the others. So when I started with it, it was strictly for using with that independent project. And what I liked about it so much was that students could post a picture of the paper they're working on. They could take a picture of something they were trying to build, because I had a student who walked around his house and he just looked for random objects. And he just started gathering things, piling them up, and he just put them on the desk. And this was for Part Genius Hour, actually. And he just decided, like, I wonder what I could make with all of this stuff. And so he kind of captured that along the way. And he was trying to make at one point a backpack that had like a cooling system with a fan, and it had styrofoam. It was like really, really interesting. But using Spaces, he could take the pictures, or I could give him a message. I could make a comment, like speaking to him. And then other students did actually speak. Some of them used just pictures. Some of them just wrote a response. But the best part about it was that they made it work for whatever their interests were. And if they weren't that interested in learning some new technology and didn't want to deal with the pictures or, adding links to websites or anything at first, they could just post a picture. I said, you still have to do something. So the students in the classroom, I said, okay, well, maybe I don't want to look at it now. Maybe I want you to just process it. So just take a picture so I can look at it later. And what I like about it too is, you can always go back to it. It captures that process over time. So then at the end of that period, which I think was probably 4 weeks initially, the students were able to, we look back at the class feed, because I had them posting so everybody could see, like, at various stages what they were doing, but then also being able to have that individual conversation with them. So they built confidence. And so that's how I started with it. But I didn't really think about it for like SEL, because similar to project-based learning, I'm not an expert on all things, but I thought I was doing PBL, and I wasn't. I was doing learning based on projects. And then somebody asked me what I was doing in my classroom to help students with SEL. And I turned it on them and I said, oh, that's a great question, but what are you doing? Because I wasn't really sure what it stood for, because there's all these acronyms in education. And sometimes, like myself, I just fall into things and I don't necessarily know what it's called. And a couple of years ago, I was doing a presentation at ISTE, and this goes back probably 7 years now almost. And I did a poster session and I was talking about some different tools I was using. And a woman said, oh, I love this. You're app smashing. And I said, what? She said, you're app smashing. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And then she explained it to me. I went, oh, she said, you didn't know, you didn't do that intentionally. I said, no, I just kind of just started like trying different things to see if they would work. And the same with PBL. I kind of like fell into it. SEL, once the person answered what they were doing, I thought, oh, okay, I'm doing this, and this activity or in my class, but I could be doing more. So I decided it's time to do some research. So the first place that I went to castle.org. And I'm curious, for anybody who's joining in, if you are familiar with Castle and if you have used any resources from their site. So, feel free to type a Y or an N into the chat, make it interactive. Just curious, because that's the first place that I went, and I found so much information there to get started. And the graphic that's on the screen, for anybody that's not real familiar, it was made for my book with ISTE by a very talented artist and sketchnoter, Amy DeFries from California. And she made that graphic, and it stuck in my mind. And so really quickly, what I think about, and when it comes to our students, helping them to develop their skills in these areas is critical, but it's also equally as important for us as adults, especially in the last 2 years. Like, if we go through all of these things, you think, okay, self-awareness, assessing our strengths as educators. Like, were there times that you felt like, wow, I'm really not doing a good job, I could be doing this better, or there's all of these opportunities out there for students, or there's these digital tools that I don't know about, and we're assessing ourselves, how we were transitioning throughout blended learning, virtual learning, everything. And our students need the same thing. And so as a language teacher, for me, it's tough, because they are very nervous to speak in Spanish. And I always tell them, I get nervous to speak in Spanish, especially when I'm around a native Spanish speaker, because I learned obviously English first, and then French, and then Spanish came after that. And so helping them to build confidence and finding ways to do that is important. And then, of course, for us as adults, and being able to have something that we create, or throughout assessments, whatever we're using, to go back and look and say, oh yeah, like, I can't believe, my students will say, oh, I can't believe I wrote that way. That was terrible. And now look at what I'm writing. Or they feel like, I could never write a paragraph, and then they're writing like multiple paragraphs. And so that is important to start with. And then social awareness, developing those understandings of other cultures. And for me as a language teacher, when I started to do project-based learning, that's where that came in more. I mean, I have the benefit that my students are studying about all of these different places where Spanish is spoken, and they're learning what it's like to go through school, or what family life is like, or what it's like when kids their age have been working for 2 or 3 years at that point, and they develop empathy and they understand others. The self-management, which I'll skip to, the stress, just thinking about the last couple of years, trying to make decisions, and that balancing all of the stress that we've been dealing with ourselves and our students as well. And then learning is hard. I mean, anything that you learn, there are times that I've struggled both as a younger student and now as an adult student learner, and figuring out how to kind of work through that and set manageable goals can be challenging. And so setting up something for our students, using the tools and the methods we have, can help them with that. Relationships, we hear that all the time, like, got to start with the relationships, keep working on the relationships. And that was tough whenever we were fully virtual, because especially if you started the year without being in person, how do you build those relationships if we didn't have the technology like we do now? I mean, imagine if that was like 20 years ago, before internet. Being able to see each other and to hear each other's voices at least makes a big difference, and you can build those relationships. And then finally, decision making. Digital citizenship, of course, but figuring out, like, how should I post something? What is appropriate to post? And then how much use of technology is too much? So all of these kind of things, even as adults, I know I struggle, like putting the phone away. It's very hard to do, but going through and modeling this for our students, but also embracing opportunities to kind of build our own skills in this, or share with them. Like I've said many times, in geometry, like I got D's and F's for half of the year. And that was very, very difficult for me. And so what I did is I set some goals, and it was challenging. I was upset a lot of the time, but I worked through it. And then talking to students about like speaking in Spanish. At the conference last week, I had the opportunity to ride into the airport with a person who came from Venezuela. And I didn't want to initially kind of admit that I spoke Spanish, because you get nervous about that. But what an opportunity that is. And the more that you kind of work through it, you build that confidence. And so sharing that with my students helps them to feel like, oh, okay, like I have to start somewhere, and it's okay to make mistakes, because we'll make mistakes, we're learning. And yeah, it can be stressful, but whenever we work together, it's way better. So that is kind of the frame for this. So here is a question for you before I share with you some of the ways we've been using Spaces and the fun that we've had in doing so. But we have those 5 competencies of SEL, and there is a giveaway involved here. So you can drop it into the chat, or love it if you would tweet out your ideas and tag me and Spaces for, like, what are your ideas? If you are using Spaces, how are you using to promote SEL? Or if you're not, like, think about what could you do in a digital space, like I'm going to share with you here with Spaces, to build or to help students to build skills in these 5 areas. So think about that. And I'm going to pause and ask Mel if there were any questions or comments, or if I should dive right into like what we've been doing.
So far, I don't have questions, but I have a comment. I'm loving that you use the castle, because those are, with the curriculum tags, those are my most important curriculum goals that I tag with my own kids in Spaces. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I think this is such a worthy webinar. And I was just about to start tweeting.
Okay. Well, there you go. Tweet your ideas and make sure you tag me on Spaces, and everybody else too. So I would love, because when we go to conferences, we do sessions, we do webinars. If we're presenting, we learn just as much. And last week, there were just ideas that came up and things that I had not thought of about how to use Spaces, for example. And I was so excited presenting and sharing Spaces, because I used the survey, and I had a list of different methods and ideas that people might have been using when it came to SEL. And when people are not familiar with something, I get so excited to share. So I was really thrilled to share with them. And then to have people ask questions like, well, could you use it for this? Or I was thinking about trying, this idea. And that's something I never thought of. So the more that we share, we learn, and it's better for our students. So here we go.
And Linda says she uses it with adults. So I just wanted to put that in there. So it's good for children and adults.
It is. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. Okay. So the very first thing, and this is surprising for some people potentially that may know me, because for years, many years of teaching, I was teaching the way I had been taught. So it was like, students come in, they sit down, here's what we're doing, here's the papers, here's your homework. Okay, don't make too much noise, make sure you're in your seat. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow, repeat. And I was always afraid, like, if a student would kind of lean on the desk or like angled on the head or something like that, or if they wanted to sit on the floor, I'm like, no way, can we work together? No way, that's too loud. But then I realized a couple of years ago, like when somebody asked me about SEL, when I was doing project-based learning, that they need those opportunities, and social emotional learning needs to be social, of course, and with some moderation. But in a language class, what I started with, the very first thing that we used with my Spanish 2 students was this random post. And often when they come in, sometimes they'll say, can we use Spaces today? And I'm like, okay, give me a minute to think of something we can do that's different. And then I just go with it. And they're really good about just like, okay, we're doing what? And then they go and do it. Or I'll give them some like parameters and then they figure it out on their own. So the first time we used it, I just wanted them to do a basic description of themselves. And I gave them, it was some review of some of the material they had in level 1 and also earlier in the year. And I also wanted them to just share some just things like, what they were interested in, and then something that was like their favorite thing in the classroom. And so they got to get up and moving, which is important because they're sitting so much. And so these are just like 2 examples of ones that I did. And now in terms of self-awareness, students write, and then after, time passes a little bit, they go back and they look at it, or because they're posting it on the one feed, the space, their classmates can see it and they can help them to kind of figure out like what they said. It's good for practice and review for, each of the students to look at it. They are not shy about correcting one another, but they do it in a way that's kind and supportive, which is great because they built these relationships over the course of this year, doing different activities together. And so very simple, just asking them, for my class, describe yourself, what's your name? Here are some verbs to use in what you're writing, and then add a picture if you want. So apparently the student's favorite thing was her name written on the board and actually the snowman, because my students, they just like to write on the board. And then another day, I had the students talk about their daily routine. So they're narrating in Spanish. And the thing I liked about this was that I can give them feedback in the room because they were completing this in the room. If they did this outside of class, I could send the message. They get the notifications. Like the one day they're like, oh, I have a notification, like something on Space I get to do. And the other part of it is that I can give them that audio feedback. And so being able to write a response to them and to say, okay, take a look at these verbs, for example, or to just be able to talk to them. And that power of voice is so important. And as students write, if I have them use this in an individual space, or it's just in one consistent, everybody can see it space, or the group spaces, they can see their growth over time. And I like that you can go back and check that. There's so many different ways to use it. And that was the first way I started. And so if you haven't used Spaces, think of just a question that you would ask in your class. If you are teaching and it's about a book, ask students to write a response about, give them some kind of like a challenge to change the ending of the book, or to create a character to be into the book. Or if you're teaching about science or history, we're educators, we are super creative. There's lots of ways to come up with just a quick prompt. And I also give the option, if students would prefer not to type the response, that they can use the audio and they can record it. And so they all did different things. Some of them did the picture and they typed it, I should say. Some of them spoke, and then you'll see some other clips of what else they did. But it was fun for me to see how they kind of took that on. So tying into a little bit of the self-awareness, as they're learning and figuring out like, wow, I really need to work on these verbs, or the structure of sentences is difficult, or I can't remember the vocabulary. So they're building their skills over time. And I try and frame it around like what I see as like the common errors there. And then the next prompt has some of that, so everybody gets that practice, but still it gives them that choice that they can create whatever they want. Then sometimes it can be stressful. So self-management and setting goals. And so it can be, as an example in Spanish, if I say, okay, you're going to write 5 sentences, I'm like, it's 5 sentences. Okay. And then I have to like quantify how many words on average are in a sentence, because I have some students who write a sentence and it has like 8 or 9 words in it in Spanish. And then I have some that might write 4 words. And so to balance out, so I always give them like an average sentence is like 4 or 5 words. So if you kind of, and they will sit there and they'll count all the words out. I'm like, just write, just go for it, just write. And for some, it can be a struggle. And so you say, okay, how about write 2 sentences, write 1 sentence, and then you just go with it. So helping them, by setting the goals. And then the other piece of it is being able to look back at what they did, which is helpful. And then working with partners. Sometimes it's like, I don't know where to begin, they say, or I'm never gonna get this right, or everybody's gonna see my mistakes. And it's like, yeah, but we're here to help one another. Like, I'm learning from you. I make mistakes all the time. And so having a space like this where they can kind of explore, they can create, they can work with one another. And then even if some task seems to be overwhelming, that's okay, because we can help to structure it and break it down. Or if you happen to have a class, like a couple of my classes are with the Spanish too, they are really good at supporting one another and coaching each other on. One other thing that I want to mention before I forget is the curriculum tags. So as a language teacher, I don't often find that I can pull in the actual standards into it and put the tags with it. And that is a really awesome feature of this. And it is so easy to do. There are so many you can choose from. And I just did this one recently, and it was before I posted it. That's why I said this space is hidden. But I like that you have that. So if you are trying to address the standards, and I share that with my students as well, because they'll say, why do we have to do this? Or why do we have to do this activity or read this book? And I'm like, well, we have these standards, and you're reading and writing and listening and speaking. And so I want to make sure that you have all of those opportunities. So that was one other example. Then we did some fun things. And this proved to be a little bit chaotic, but in a good way, and interesting and fun for them, and definitely for me. So this was one day they came into class and said, can we do something with spaces today? And I said, we just did something with spaces yesterday. Yeah, but it's awesome. And we want to do something else. I'm like, okay. And then they say, well, what did you have planned for us today? And I said, well, I had this, like, I was going to have you do some verbs, and I was going to go over some vocabulary. And they're like, no, can't we just do spaces? I'm like, okay, I guess we can do some spaces. So the vocab that we're working on was dealing with your daily routine, getting ready. They were just about to start working on a project that was like, they're getting ready for some special event that they chose. So I decided really quickly to make a very open-ended prompt about like a fashion show. And I put them into groups, and I said, okay, all you need to do is get X amount of clothing, pictures. And I told them, like, don't put each other, like, don't get the faces on there because I might be sharing this, and then write a sentence about it. Or you could put a picture and do a recording or something like that. So that was one example. The other one, which the picture on the left that has like group 1, was a time where I gave them a long list of questions, like they were doing an interview. And they went very basic, back to like Spanish 1, that, how are you? What's your name? And then they, kind of advanced with the grammar and the verb tenses. And I think there were probably 25 or 30 questions, just really long on the sheet. Now, that is what I intended to give them on that day whenever they came in. I was going to have them sit down and have either a conversation with a partner or write some responses, or kind of a mix of that. So when they came in, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's this paper, all of these questions, I'm going to put you into groups. And I don't care how you do this. If you want to go and one person is the interviewer, ask the question, and then everybody else answers, you decide. And so they went, some of them stayed in the room, a couple of them went out and sat in the hall, which years ago I would have panicked at, because like, what is your class doing in the hall? But I was like, this is great. Like, they gave me the idea to do this. I wasn't prepared to do it, but quickly, within 2 minutes, set it up. And they took it, there were 3 groups. They took it in different directions. One group sat in the room, and I do have a picture that I'll share with you. And they just took charge. So talk about like building leadership skills. Students who tended to be like really quiet and not really speak up a lot in class, they were taking charge. They were in the small groups, felt more comfortable in that smaller space. And probably because of the fact some of the other students, and it's a small class to begin with, their relationships. So typically, even though they're a small class, they tend to kind of socialize with the people that are closest to them. But this got them up and moving, sometimes throughout the whole school. So they're building relationships, they're learning about one another, they're developing that social awareness. And then thinking broader than that, different activities that we can do, like if students are doing project-based learning, or if they're learning, like for me in Spanish, about different places where Spanish is spoken, it doesn't have to be a big project. It can be almost like a scavenger hunt where they each have a different place and you say, okay, what do schools look like? What is family life like? Give them a place to find, and then they share it out either in a picture, maybe they record a video, they have some audio, they write some text, and then you learn about other people and places. So lots of possibilities, can totally be done on the fly. Like when they come in and I get the pressure to like, okay, I have to come up with something, but it's a lot of fun to see whenever the stream is there and you see like refresh feed. And I'm like, okay, what is going to be here? So this one, again, with the fashion show, you could tell which was which. Pictures of like their shoes and their pants and identifying it. So it was fun because they were walking around, not totally in my classroom. And I said to them, you could pick up a book and take a picture of something in the book. I said, you want to go take a walk around in the hallways and down to the office? I said, just don't go outside the building, just move around the school and take a picture, describe it in Spanish. If you want to write it, if you want to speak it, it doesn't matter to me. And they did it. And I gave them a time limit because I said, don't be gone for the whole period. Like we want to come back and see our fashion show on the screen. But it was like a last minute kind of decision of, okay, how can we use this? So it's not like them just running around the school and not actually doing something. And I walk around and I see them, they go downstairs and they're standing in the hall and they're posing. There's some artwork. We did some things today actually as well, but then to see what they come up with. And I noticed just at the end of the hall, them walking, with one person or in a small group and just having conversations, which I know are not totally related to the class, but they're building the relationships. And then they're also deciding like, what should they post? Should they post everybody, like the face? Should they get people in it that are not in the class? And being able to like decide what is the right thing to post and, not delaying the return to class, for example. And then a second part of this, because of course, the next day they want to do it again. I said, well, we can't just keep taking pictures of clothing. So the next day I said, all right, I'm going to put some pictures on the board here. And I want you, and it was just random images, you Google and like fashion catalogs, those type of things. And I said, I want you to describe what you think about that. Or I'm going to put up a picture of a store and tell me if you would like to go shopping there and what you might buy. And so it was just a prompt in the room. And then they could, again, write it, they could talk about it, and they didn't actually need to stay in the room. I said, if you want to go and sit in the hall, that's fine. Just because some of them were choosing to record and then people were talking in the room. So thinking about, the 5 ways right now, losing track of which one I'm on because there's all these different ideas, but you could do like a quick scavenger hunt and give students an idea of things to look for, or things even in your classroom, and to share something about it. 2, to have them do something like a fashion show, or if they did a project or they're creating something, or if it's an art class, take a picture of what they're creating and post it and let everybody kind of see it. It's kind of like a gallery walk. The speaking, having them reflect on something they're learning in your class and recording that, and then you can give them that audio feedback, giving a discussion question and having them just post and knowing that other people are going to see it if it's all in that same space. And that, digital citizenship comes back in. So again, like just falling into it. So this was the group that sat down that I mentioned, and they're all smiling. I covered up their faces, even though I told them, I said, I took their picture, and they said, well, why are you taking our picture? I said, well, I want to show like how you're working on this. And one student asked if their face would actually be shown. I said, no, I'm just going to cover it up with a yellow smiley face. They went, oh, but you can show my face. I said, no, it's okay. You're all going to be like, we're so happy to be in Spanish. But this group, 4 totally like normally don't necessarily like sit together. They're friends and they get along really well, but I don't know that they've ever really worked together other than just being in the same classroom space. So the groups that I put them in were totally randomly generated. And this group decided to go through and with the questions that they had. So let's say there were 12 questions. They broke it up and they just kind of rotated. And so the student that was in blue might have started off and said like, hola. And then he asked the first question and the first student kind of rotated around. And then for the second question, the second student asked it and then they rotated around. Like they just figured out how to do that on their own. And they were done so fast. And they just said, now what do we do? And I said, wait, you're done? They said, yeah, but they made these decisions really quickly. Okay, here's what we have to do. here's the number of questions. There's 4 of us. We all need to answer. Let's go this way. And they were done with it. So that worked really well for decision making, for building the relationships, building that confidence and their self-awareness, because I was in the back of the room, obviously, I was in the hall too, because some of the students were sitting in the hall doing this because they were recording, but being able to observe them and seeing those interactions, also hearing some of the students say, how do you say this word? Or what does this word mean? And in a classroom, students don't always feel comfortable asking for help. And especially if it's a larger class, sometimes they hide that. I was a student like that. Like, I don't want to admit that I don't know something, but in these smaller groups, I noticed they felt more comfortable. And when they build that comfort and confidence in the small groups, then it builds more in their classroom. And so even if, and this has happened in other situations as well, even if they don't want to speak in class in front of their classmates, if they sit in a small group and they record a response and then it's played and everybody can hear it, they don't care. Because at that point, when they recorded it and they were involved in that activity, they felt comfortable and they were in that space where if they made a mistake, only people that knew were them and the people in that small group. And if they did make a mistake, they had their classmates there to support them and say like, oh no, it means this, or sometimes jokingly, like they laugh at one another, which it's funny. I mean, we do it in speaking English a lot too. But anyway, so some of those students did it like that. The students that went into the hall, which I'll show you the picture, they just sat down and they divided it up. And then I did have one group in the other class that they coordinated it somehow. One of them read the question and then they all said the same answer. I'm like, you can't all have the same answer. Like, you don't all live in the same place and do the same things. But then they did change it up a little bit. But what I liked about it is that I left it very open and they could then decide exactly what they wanted to do. And so, and my room is kind of interesting. So there are the students sitting in the hall, giving the thumbs up, because I think when I walked out of my classroom, I said, well, how's it going? What do you think about this? And they're like, thumbs up, they love it. And thinking about, the benefits, SEL ties in directly to, 21st century, which we're well into the 21st century now, but we still say like 21st century skills, essential skills. But if we look at preparing them for work or whatever they do, going to college, going into some type of career, they need to have some skills like teamwork and resilience and being able to collaborate and problem solve and have empathy. And that's what SEL is. And giving them the chances to develop those skills now is going to better prepare them for the future, because who knows what types of jobs will exist. And the one thing that I know for sure is that we need to be flexible. No matter what we do, we got to have that flexibility, because there will be challenges. We will face stress and struggles like we've experienced. And we have to have ways to kind of manage that and push ourselves through. And also, especially in education, work with our students and help them to push through those too. So the benefits, there are a ton. The creativity, you talk about the C's. I mean, it might be 4, 5, 7 C's. I don't know how many at this point. There are a lot of them. But for me as a language teacher, my students were communicating, definitely collaborating. In some cases, there was some critical thinking involved in some of the later activities that we did. And then the creativity, putting the things in their scavenger hunt. And then I think I added the pictures from the recent thing that we did too, where they really were walking all around the school. But it helps them so much. And even just those relationships and being able to understand, the perspectives of their classmates. And I know that the whole time they're working together and walking around the school, doing the activity I've given them for Spaces, they're not speaking in Spanish the whole time. They're not talking about Spanish the whole time. There's other conversations happening, but that's important too, because they need to understand what other people experience. They need to develop those relationship skills, to build empathy, and it goes a long way. So I have a ton of fun learning with them through these activities. And some of the future skills, which I mentioned a few of those, but World Economic Forum had, and this is from 2018, and it was predicted for 2022, which here we are. And these are some of the top 10, and some of those skills have shifted, but I put these in, not necessarily like the order that they gave, but just thinking off the top of my head, what these types of activities have enabled students to do. I mean, the creativity, I would not say that that was number one for them, but it gives them different ways to share their learning or to engage in an activity. And if they want to take a picture of something on the wall, if they want to look something up, if they want to record it, if they want to be funny with some of the vocabulary, it's not the exact thing, which I'll give you an example of that. Setting goals, because they were like, we have to do this in this amount of time. decision making, and the other ones too, which I won't go through each of those because we know that they're important, not just for the future, but for now. And activities and using spaces, for example, like I have been with some of these ideas, definitely help students to do that. Now, the picture that's on the screen is one example of what one of my students had shared from a year ago, the first time that we used this in my STEAM class. And so they just took a picture of what they were working on. They were making a chat bot, and they were very excited. And that was just one comment, because there were other comments after that, like, I think I got it to work. And then like, wait, I'm not sure how to work this. And I'm having this problem. And they weren't in the classroom. So being able to kind of monitor that and respond to them, whether I wrote it or I spoke to them, made a huge difference, because then they felt more connected to the class and their classmates as well. So it was kind of fun, lots of ways to use it. And then this was, let's see, last week, I forget which day, but I gave them a prompt because, again, like we do some of the spaces, and I gave them a prompt and I said, well, I want you to each write your own response to it. But if you want to go out into the school, look around, find pictures, relate to the vocab, totally fine. So they were just kind of sitting, reading through the prompt. And the basis of the prompt was, we're learning about word or places in our community. And so we have things like, the park, a fountain, the corner, the traffic lights. I mean, not a lot of things that you can find in your school, but then there's things like mailbox, office, medical office, and elevator. I mean, there's a lot of random words. So I gave them a prompt that I wanted them to describe their community. And I said, okay, you just have to imagine that right now, like the school is the community. And so I want you to write this amount of sentences and include like this verb tense and these vocabulary words from this chapter that we're on. And you can go out in school, you can walk around, form a small group and find some of these things, but you have to write your own sentences. So they went out, and of course, like you have to, oops, didn't mean to do that. It's kind of hard to see, but on the right screen, they cut pictures. Like one of the words was a fountain, which it was supposed to be like the bigger fountain that you would find outside in a park or something. And it was a picture of the water fountain. Or the mailboxes, they went into the main office, and we have all the large, the teacher mailboxes. So they took a picture of that. And then if I could put the videos on here, but the students' faces are on them, they record videos of themselves like walking into certain areas, and they were narrating it in Spanish, like, I am walking into the nurse's office because I need this. And then they pretended that it was they made a paper and wrote that it was the pharmacy, and they held it up, and then they said like, I'm going to the pharmacy because I need, and they named items that were on their vocab list. But they took random pictures. They went into the gym. One of the vocab words is lifting weights. And so they went to the gym and they were lifting weights and had those pictures. And some of them had the audio, some of them had the video, some of them just had the sentences, or some of them went out and they just snapped the pictures. Then they came back into the classroom and they wrote down what their sentences were. But it was that was one that was just like on a whim. I had wanted them to just stay in the classroom and sit at their desk and write it. But then when they came in and they were sitting at their desk and looking at it, I said, you know what? I think maybe we should have kind of like a field trip. And they said, where are we going? I said, we're not leaving the school, but take this prompt and go around the school and see if you can find and post something. And then you can create a sentence or a description of it, but go and walk with somebody. And so, yeah, I gave them a time period. I said, okay, it's this time right now. I need you back here at this time. And they were. I did loop around to see where they were. Nobody was on the first floor, which is where my classroom is. Everyone was downstairs, but they were in different areas and they were taking the pictures and they were posting. And then we came back into the classroom, then looking at the feed, they're like, refresh. You have to see mine and see what I wrote. So it was pretty cool. So anyway, those are just some ideas. And so I gathered some things that I did, and daily prompts and journal writing, which it can be last minute once you have your space created. And the other thing I like about it too, is you can set them up. So let's say right now you're like, I think I want to do this. Create some spaces, make some prompts, but keep them hidden. And then you have all of the work done. And then you can go and you can change them. You can put them so the students can see them whenever you want. But if you have some time now, because we're not a full hour webinar, you could do that. The digital portfolios. So having students have their own space, and they can still post somewhere else, but then they could also put that in their own space with you, and you can give them that feedback over time. Like I mentioned, the Genius Hour project-based learning is a workspace, just a way to communicate, a quick assessment. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention for midterms, and I had never done this before, but they had to do a writing prompt. And as a language teacher, got to be careful with the online translators. There's a little bit of trust involved there. I said, if you would rather prefer, I should say, to read your response or to write it and then record it or to write it and post on Spaces, that's fine. And most of them chose to do that. And then I was able to just give them audio feedback. And what a difference that made. They came in, they said they loved being able to just like hear me explain something to them rather than reading it. It made it click better. The small group activities, it's good for self-management. There's so many benefits. And so I know that was really fast. Oh, sorry, Mel.
And I was going to say, Linda suggested, and I thought this was a great idea. She said you could create a guided tour of your school campus for new students. Cool idea.
Oh, that is a great idea. And let me go back to, there we go. So I task you with the question. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat or reach out to me. But enter and let us know, what are your ideas? So I shared some, I think more than 5, might've been about 6, but that's okay. 5 was a starting point of fun ways that we've used it in my classroom. And I know that when I go to school tomorrow, it's going to be the same thing again. Like, can we use Spaces? I got to think about something because we're starting to learn more past tense verbs. And it's quite difficult for them in level 2. So I have to think about, what can I have them do that's going to really attach meaning to that? And I'm thinking maybe having them come up with like their own mnemonic or some type of song or music, and we'll see how that goes. But at any rate, whatever we decide to do, it'll help them to develop these essential SEL skills and definitely learn the Spanish, because that is important as well.
Rochelle, when you were speaking, the thing that I loved the most as an educator, and then, as a learner, is just that your kids have the ability to make those requests to you, like, hey, we want to do this, and you're flexible to do that. And just that you honor their choice and their voice through this is just incredible. And it really does develop their social emotional skills. They are learning all the skills that are important for as they grow up and as they enter the workforce, or just, grow and continue learning. So that was just such a great time. Linda also says, Linda has a lot of good ideas. She says you could reverse the scavenger hunt where they scan a QR code, snap a picture of the item, and explain it in Spanish. Definitely. And I also loved how, you promote that differentiation with the voice and with the reading. Like you are grabbing all those different ways to learn and for your students to practice. That's phenomenal. And I just love that Spaces is able to facilitate that kind of learning and practice. Do you mind going back to the screen that you had, all the Spacestronauts, in case anybody's watching and they want to join us, because Rochelle is an active member in our Spacestronaut community. So is Linda. And if you want to join our Spacestronaut community, go to bit.ly/Spacestronauts. And definitely follow Rochelle if you are not already. She is a great resource with ed tech and SEL and all of this wonderful stuff. And just remember too, that Spaces is free for educators. So this is a tool that if you want to start using and playing with, you don't have to worry about investing a whole bunch of money. But I love how your students request it. And it's certainly fun for them. It's fun for us too. I use it and I enjoy it. Yes, thank you. Oh, David is here. David, oh my goodness. Yes, and David is also a part of our Spacestronaut community. I'm so glad that we have Spacestronauts here with us.
I know. And I'm going to put that one slide back up again. So just in case.
How do they win they win one of your books?
Yeah, so I want to know their ideas for promoting SEL with Spaces. And so they have to tweet and tag me and Spaces. And then I'll just do the magic spinning wheel, or you can do the magic spinning wheel, and we'll pick some winners to see. It'll be exciting.
Oh, that is so exciting. David says, join the community. So many great ideas shared, including what David shares. And Linda says that she loves the DigSit impact of kids talking in an authentic environment. And you really highlighted that well, Rochelle. So great. So if you have any questions, we have a couple of minutes if you'd like to ask, but we want to honor everybody's time. But we're definitely here. I tweeted out that I love yes, I'm tripping over my words. So I have to write it down. But I really do love how you honored the choice and voice for your students. I think that is so important. And also I love how you share how you've learned along the way. You're very transparent. Like, yes, we have 10 million acronyms to learn, but it's okay because we're growing together. And that's the best part about this community as well. So thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And you're funny about saying about the the students like honoring their choice, because sometimes I feel like I don't have a choice when they come in, because it's like 10 or 11 of them against me saying like, we want to use Spaces today, but it's so fun. Like, I wish I could have shown more of their pictures of just like side shots with the mask and the clothing. And then just some of the videos today, like walking. And it's just such a variety, and it's so much fun. But the best
Yes.
part of it is like, they're practicing the Spanish, but they're also developing all these other skills. And, that's not something that I set out thinking like, I'm going into this for the SEL. Like, I was just going into this because it offered so many possibilities to use my classroom. And then you start to see all these benefits. So it's like, why wouldn't you use this? If you're looking for one tool that you could do so many things with, like, this is it, because you can do a ton with it, way more than I know. So that's why I want to know what people's ideas are. I'm going to take them all. So Linda, tweet those out.
Yes, Linda. Yes, David, do it. And, talk about like the classroom social media community building. You've hit on that as well. So just wonderful. I applaud you. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you so much for joining. And for those who are watching the replay, we appreciate you as well. Make sure to tweet Rochelle out and Spaces out, and maybe you will win one of her books. And if you don't win, you can always go to bit.ly/pothbooks. I know that by heart.
I know. Thank you. And thank you, Spaces, for the opportunity to share what we're doing.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.